I hope you're enjoying the Agile track and the various sessions, because unfortunately they're not going to really work for you. If you're sitting here listening to this, someplace implicitly or explicitly you know that there are some bigger problems that you're either dealing with right now or that you're going to have to deal with somewhere up the line. And that's what this talk is going to be about. This is your world. It would be nice to project Google Earth on here and say, "This, here you are." Well, let's say this is your team. This is a workspace you're dealing with. And if you're doing an agile incremental approach, you'll be doing that in a circle. Okay. Unfortunately, none of us is alone. Your team, as big as it looks to you when you're in the middle of it, is only one of a number of teams working in your organization. Right? That's you here in the middle. That's the one turning around in green. And if you're going in and trying to change things, you have a bit of power. You can go in and focus on that team and change it. But what happens when you try to do more than that? There's not really that much you can do. Right? But in spite of that, there are things that happen. When you're moving here, your motion will cause you to bounce into other teams. Now, either those teams are flexible and they'll start moving in rhythm with you. This is something we call resonance. This is a good thing. This is how you get other teams to sync up with you and get changes to occur. This can be too much of a good thing. Any of you who've had military service or know the problem with armies marching in step know that they have to break step when they march over a bridge. Why is that? Too much resonance is a bad thing. Right? It's like, a snowball effect. Are you running downhill? You run downhill and you're getting in rhythm and you're running faster and faster, and what eventually happens is you fall. You can go too fast. And I've seen examples of some companies who were too agile, they went too fast, there was too much resonance, and they broke up. But the point is, using this resonance will help you bring change. It's going to happen anyway, whether you want it or not, because you're not alone. On the other side, let's take this team here, and they're resonating with you. You have this Brownian motion going, you're knocking off teams, and this one happens to be flexible, and you're going to resonate with them. On the other hand, this team here isn't. That team, that system there, I don't know what they are. Maybe they're your mainframe programmers. Maybe that's your QA. Maybe that's your middle management. They have no reason to change, and they don't like what you're doing. You're bouncing off them too, right? And what happens when you keep bouncing off something that doesn't want to move? Well, there's an old Zen proverb that says, a drop of water will hollow out the strongest stone, but I don't think you want to wait that long, right? What happens, especially, let's think about you're going incrementally, so you're rubbing up against them. This creates friction, right? And eventually will create a blister. What's a blister? When you have one on the back of your ankle when you have a new pair of shoes on. A blister is your body's way of protecting you from damage. The blisters that come up, we see them there, when the organizational antibodies start coming up, when the resistance to your process starts coming up. This is actually also not bad in and of itself. Just the way that too much resonance is not good, these organizational antibodies serve as a buffer, serve as a way of slowing things down so that you don't start tripping up. Okay? So what happens? You'll start working in your team and start using all these great processes that all my colleagues here have been talking about, and they're really going to help you here. What happens when you get outside of here? That's where problems come that aren't under your direct influence. Okay? Now, to understand this, we have to understand a little bit more about what we're doing, what we're working on, how we think and how we do our work. Okay? What is this agile stuff we're doing, and why is it causing so much of a problem to other people? Well, there's a couple of people there who are at fault, and the first one is Sir Isaac Newton. Sir Isaac Newton came up with a number of great ideas. I think the one is that the most powerful law in the world is the law of inertia. People don't want to move and people don't want to change. The other one is this idea of cause and effect. And part of understanding the basics of why this whole agile stuff works and why we think differently from other people and stuff is understanding some little things about cause and effect. Okay? Because what we are doing is essentially a paradigm shift away from what management is doing and what they're thinking. Management is still stuck, for the great part, in a Newtonian concept of work based on Newtonian mechanics and physics, which means the whole is the sum of the parts, and if you study the parts and get them under control, you can understand the whole. And oh, by the way, if those parts are too expensive, you can get them cheaper in a dozen from someplace over east. That's scary. But that's the way people think. And there's an interesting quote that came out in a book written around the year 2000 crisis, is saying that modern science has long since gone beyond Newtonian mechanics, moved on to quantum mechanics, but somehow that never got, those thoughts were never passed on to management schools. So essentially we're dealing with things, we're thinking in a totally different paradigm than our managers are. So let's take a look at the tasks we do, the issues we deal with, the problems we have. And I'd like you to, if you will, to step back a little bit and let's abstract this in the different types of tasks we do and different types of issues we deal with. Cause and effect. Easiest way to understand that is go over here, and God, I hope I turned the right one on or off. Oh, that didn't work, huh? Well, there. That turned. Now, who wants to bet with me that if I do that again, that light will go off? That's obvious. That's known. Cause and effect is known. This is a realm we call simple. So, let's go on to another realm where I push the on button on my laptop and it turns on. Now, this is pretty obvious, right? You do this, and it shorts out a breaker and current passes through. Why does your computer turn on? Why, when you press the on button on your mobile phone, does that work? That's also mechanics. That's also cause and effect. And you're all smart. That's why you're here at this conference, right? You could probably, if you don't understand it now, you could understand it, right? It's knowable. You could go to school and learn about it and work in that profession and understand it. But right now we don't know it. But it is knowable, and there is a cause and effect there. This realm we call complicated. Cause and effect is hidden, but it's knowable. This is where managers like to work on this side. There's cause and effect, and that's clear. Even though you don't understand it, we can get a consultant in and he'll tell us. On the other side, though, we have a different type of cause and effect. And what we deal here with is a phenomenon that's known in social complexity science terms as retrospective coherence. Let me give you an example of what retrospective coherence is. Let's say you had a party last Saturday night, and looking at your eyes, it's probably a really good party. So Sunday morning, cleaning up after the party, tripping over the beer bottles and everything, and talking to your partner about why was this a good party? What made it so? I think, we probably had some good music. We had the right people, and the food and drink was also pretty good. Okay, so since we know why we have this cause and effect, we'll do this in a Newtonian way. Next month I would like you to plan for a party, and I want it to be a success. And now, since we know what makes it a success, we'll print out sheets for everyone. We'll invite the same people, and we will demand that they'll be there. We'll play exactly the same music, and everybody will get a sheet telling them when they have to eat and drink something. Who's willing to guarantee that this will be a successful party? No takers on that. Okay, let's leave away the sheets. Let's let them eat and drink what they want. Any takers there? Will that be a success? You have different experience in parties than I do. It's probably the force of your personality that makes it so. It's funny, we have this gut feeling that says, no, it won't be, but we're not sure why. Now, this not sure why is a phenomenon we call retrospective coherence. Retrospective coherence means that in something we call a complex system, we have cause and effect. But what happens is in complex systems is that the cause and effect emerges as the system self-organizes, and afterwards it's clear how it got there. So hindsight is always 20/20. But this cause and effect is only clear looking backwards. It's only retrospectively coherent. Okay? Cause and effect, coherent in retrospect. There's a fourth realm that we deal with, which is where we can notice no patterns of cause and effect. And this is a realm we call chaos. No discernible cause and effect. Oh, just to make this complete, this is the black hole of stuff we still haven't figured out yet. And we keep it in the middle there until we figure out which quadrant this belongs to. So, you notice we have a bunch of things on this side where we have a very clear cause and effect. And we have things on this side where cause and effect aren't really clear in advance. You can't predict them. And over the past 2 years or so, I've done research and tests with now around 300 Agile software developers and managers, analyzing their cognitive bias and their understanding for the issues and tasks and things they do and where they belong here. And empirical evidence shows that most of the tasks that managers deal with, and okay, a lot of the deterministic tasks of coding are in this very clear, ordered side. The other task we deal with, trying to predict the market, figure out what our customers need, trying to deal with people, that all comes up on this side. And one of the problems we have is figuring out where and how to deal with these things. Okay, so what we need to do is first we need to work differently because we've been taught how to use this toolkit, and a lot of us are still floundering around in this toolkit. And we need to work differently because even some of the things that have been passed along in the Agile realm. There's a saying that serves as the basis for Scrum. You heard Jeff Sutherland say this yesterday. He's using something called inspect and adapt. Well, inspect and adapt is wrong. Inspect and adapt is wrong. If we go back to that slide before and say we're dealing with complex things, which is what we're dealing with the most time when we're in Agile projects, inspect and adapt means that we have something we can actually look at. The technique that we should use, technique I propagate, is apply, inspect, and adapt. Actually do something first. I've been around so long that I've seen Agile projects fail. Yes, it does happen. XP projects fail. Scrum projects fail. It happens. And one of the reasons I've most often seen for these projects failing is because people do inspect and adapt without doing the apply before. And so how do they interpret that? Inspect and adapt means inspect. I'll go down to the bookstore down there, and because somebody was talking about this new development method, I'll buy the book. I'll read that. That's my inspection. Adapt, okay, that's cool. I'd like to use that. No, that would take me outside of my comfort zone. I don't like to do that. No, we can't do that here. Adapt means choose the things you like, that make sure you stay in your comfort zone, and then maybe go and apply it. All right? Working like that, you'll never be successful because you'll never go outside your comfort zone. And it's funny, I teach a lot of Scrum classes, not as many as some of my colleagues do, but enough to realize that I always get the same question: how long should an iteration be? How long should a sprint be? And you know what? It makes no difference what I say. What you have to do is just choose a number, pick a number between 1 and 4, okay? Just pick any number. And all you do is you do a sprint of that length, you apply it first, and then you have something to talk about. And then you do the inspect and adapt. But if you haven't done it first, you don't know what you're talking about. So we, ourselves, have to learn to deal differently with the problems we have. We have to learn and accept the fact that we deal with things differently and we work differently than management does. Okay? So, let me put this in perspective of management. Okay? Let's look at this from the point of system and knowledge. Management theory for a long time was based on the Newtonian mechanics idea of order. Order is where we have cause and effect, and we can either know it, we can look it up in a dictionary, or it's knowable, so we call in an expert. Knowledge says that here the agents in our system obey, these are supposed to be rules. Now, if you have this type of system, there's a great management technique for that. It's called waterfall. Waterfall is a fantastic technique to be used in a system where there's order. Because there's clear cause and effect, you can know everything in advance. And because the agents in the systems obey rules, you can predict behavior, and you can direct behavior. This field is known as process engineering. And that's the realm that Mr. Taylor, who we all know and love, dealt in. I presume you're all familiar with Mr. Taylor, or even if not, you've probably had to suffer under some of his legacy. Actually, some of the first references I found were in the 1950s from a German biologist. And the idea that, there are organisms who don't obey rules. Humans, for example, we don't like to obey rules if we don't have to. What do you do if you have a system that's ordered but you don't obey rules? Well, there are some certain predictive measures here, and we call them heuristics. Out of this idea of having an ordered system and heuristics, type of management style that came out of here is something we call systems thinking. It's described in books by Peter Senge, Tom Peters, Fifth Discipline, that type of company. This is interesting. We go from the idea of the organization and management style being mechanistic, being a machine, to it being a biological organism. Here, you can't tell people what to do because they're people and they won't obey rules. But what you have the leader with a vision, and he leads his flock, and he'll lead, guiding them with his vision. But since he knows they're people, he'll keep turning around and making sure they are all following him. Go another couple of steps and turn around, make sure they're all following him. This is something we call a feedback loop. This is a classic style of management. One thing that we notice here is that we still think that the systems are ordered. So, there's another class of systems we have to deal with, where what we have is something we call unorder. And for those of you in the back who can't read this unorder has a dash in it. And the idea for this dash comes from someone else we know and love, Count Dracula. In Bram Stoker's book of Dracula, he describes the vampires as being the undead. They're neither living nor dead. They're in the process of becoming dead. These systems are neither ordered nor chaotic. They're in the process of becoming ordered, an emergent, self-organized order. Another interesting thing here with regards to learning, and I'm just saying this because Rachel's sitting in the front, is that when we deal with learning, we deal with the comfort zone and the panic zone, and another zone in between which we tend to call the learning zone, I'm starting to call that the uncomfort zone. Because the proper zone is neither the comfort zone, because you don't have to change, nor the panic zone, where other problems kick in, but it's a zone where you're uncomfortable, but you're in the process of becoming comfortable. Because what happens when you learn is you move a bit back into your comfort zone, but you've expanded your comfort zone to cover similar situations. So, interesting thing here, unorder, emergent behavior, self-organization. Classic example, how do birds migrate? I love this one. You know, when the weather gets cold, birds migrate down south. And it's pretty obvious how they do that, right? They call up Heathrow Airport, get a weather report, and put in a flight plan. Then they sit down at the briefing table with their union representatives, of course, to discuss how long they can fly without having to take a union-mandated break. And they'll also discuss seniority rules to say who flies at the front of the flock. And flying like that, they'll eventually get south. Right. Now, actually, birds haven't figured that out yet. They have yet to get a management consultant in to tell them how to optimize their flight plan. So birds fly according to 3 simple rules. Avoid collision. The worst thing that can happen is that you crashed next to somebody else. So avoid collision at all costs. Fly at the same speed. Right? So if you don't see anybody around you, look back, you're probably flying too fast. Or if you see the rest of the flock in front of you, speed up. And the third one, fly, so you don't get lost, fly towards the center of the flock. Now, if you fly towards the center of the flock but avoid collision, you'll eventually end up flying parallel in the same direction. The behavior of a flock of birds occurs as a result of all the birds following 3 really stupidly simple rules. Now, if we're in a system where this behavior emerges this way, one interesting thing is that every emergence, every instantiation, to use an OO term, will be unique. Every time you put this team together, they will organize themselves in a different way. And that's a very important fact to know to learn how to deal with these things. We're saying, okay, we have emergent order, and we follow rules, led to the idea that, oh, if there obey rules, we can put together mathematical models and run simulations on this. This is the stuff that people at the Santa Fe Institute started doing. This idea of computational and mathematical complexity. Robert Axelrod, Stuart Kaufman, these guys. Well, bad news, folks. Humans aren't birds. Right? These rules don't apply to us. Now, we don't like to deal with rules. Why? Why not? Well, there's a couple of reasons. First, humans do not think rationally. We only think rationally if we're autistic. The leading edge of neuropsychological research says that humans, when making a decision, apply a subconscious, highly optimized first fit pattern matching algorithm, and then they'll rationalize that based on whatever context they're in. And there are more men here than women, so you know that women are very good at rationalizing any decision they've made. We guys still have a bit of catching up to do here. Could we cut that out of the video?
I'll get you later.
Okay. And this is really scary because the pattern matching algorithm is optimized to be first fit. We have to react very quickly and not necessarily best fit. Okay? Which means that our behavior from a psychological point of view is inherently neurotic. That's scary. And So we are confronted with a situation, must make a decision, apply this instinctively, and then we rationalize it. So I have to make a decision about what to do in the company, and this happens overnight a lot of times. And I go into work the next day in the meeting, and somebody says, Joseph, why did you choose that? I have two possible answers. One, I made this decision based on an in-depth analysis of all the material available to me at the time. And the second one was, I had a dream and a frog told me. Both are equally valid rationalizations of a process I have no control over. Okay. Now, another reason why we have human behavior cannot follow rules because it's inherently unpredictable. We have multiple identities, multiple roles inside multiple social complex systems that we exist in simultaneously. For example, you're head of development. You also develop in your company. You have management responsibilities. You're juggling all these things at the same time. And we can almost predict the way you do that, and then your wife calls and says your child has to go to the hospital. I hope that doesn't happen, but you get this priority interrupt, and this is non-predictable. There's no way you can do this on a personal level. We can't follow rules. Another reason why, well, we tend to impute an intention where none exists. Means, oops, sorry, I made a mistake, but you did it on purpose. Funny how that works, huh? Okay, there are a couple other reasons why, but these are reasons why mathematical modeling of human behavior as a way of dealing with this, as a way of managing this, tends to break down. So what's happened in the past less than 10 years is that there's a new science that's come up, something called social complexity, which deals with this. It deals with issues of how to deal with groups of people. And I've spent most of my research time in the past, well, since I started doing this work, I've tried to figure out why it works. And this has given me the key to understanding why it works, and also a toolbox to learn to how to change and adapt and optimize this stuff. Okay? All of these are valid techniques within boundaries. Like I said, waterfall is a great method applied within the right ontological boundaries. Ontology in this sense is used in the philosophical sense of type of system and not the computer sense, which is actually a taxonomy. The problem that most managers have is they suffer from something we'd call an ontological myopia, or short-sightedness, saying that since this is all I see, I presume that this works all over the place. Or if all you have is a hammer, you see all your problems as being nails. Right? Okay, so another interesting thing is that how you view this, your cognitive bias influences how you view conflict. Okay? People have different levels of awareness, of consciousness of conflict, different levels of miscommunication and trust and distrust. I'm going to put this into perspective. We're going to take a look at this from an objective, subjective, rational, and radical. Down here in this corner, we have something we call the functionalist. view of conflict. This is a very mechanistic way. Conflict is a result of misfunction in the organization, in the instrument, in the tool, and it must be fixed. It's a sign that something's wrong and we have to do something about it. It's a very mechanistic interpretation of this. Looking at this objectively and having a rational way of dealing with it. On the other side, you can take this to the extreme, where you get what we would call a structuralist view. Conflict is an inherent result of the struggle inherent in the system. It's a very Marxist way of doing it. It's a result of the type of government we have, a clash between the classes. Right? Looking at this as a functionalist system, looking at this as a function of the system, as a result of it. The other side, moving on, we get the more subjective views. The Constructivist view, conflict is a result of engaging with differences, and it's a doorway to opening up and understanding. And if we're all nice people and learn how to talk with each other, then we can deal with it. Okay? Works. Imagine what happens when you have somebody with this type of cognitive bias trying to deal with somebody with this type of cognitive bias. Right? Fourth quadrant, which is sort of where I guess I live, would be the postmodern view of conflict being a result of inherent power struggles to contribute to the dominant discourse happening in a system. Okay. Sorry, that was really philosophical. I'll try to get you back on the ground of reality pretty quickly. But as you see, these are a couple of different ways that people view management, view issues and problems, and view conflict. And these are the challenges we have to deal with, is that because we are the way we are, we do the things we do, and because of the way we are and the things we're doing, we look at things differently than managers. We speak a different language than them, and there's a lot of conflict inherent there. Now, the conflict we have between us and the managers, is that down here? Is it a result of our systems being this way? Or is it a result of us as people? Where is it? What's your cognitive bias? Where do you think this conflict lies? That's not a rhetorical question. I can't give you your answer, and I don't expect you to give me an answer, but just let's leave it in the room and let's just think about it. Okay, so knowing that we have these differences and we have these problems, let's take a look at the possible solutions. What can we do, and what do we need? Well, nature tends to build up blisters, right, as a type of buffer. What are the possible buffers that we can have to deal with these conflicts? Of course, the interest would be in engaging with them and not avoiding them. But if you want to be able to work side by side, knowing that you can't engage in them, and until you get to that point where you can, you're going to need this type of buffer. There are a couple types of buffers. People. You can put in a person as a buffer if you're having conflict. Something we jokingly says, you just use the project manager facade pattern. That'll work. Okay? Remember, in this sense, a buffer can also be a semi-permeable membrane or a unidirectional membrane that puts things out in one direction but doesn't let things go back in. Sounds like some Scrum Masters I know. Hint. Process can become a buffer. as can, one of the most powerful ones that we see, is protocol and ritual. There are whole societies whose society is built on the structure of buffers to human interaction. So if you have these problems, before you are even able to deal with the problems, you're going to have to do some triage. You're going to have to set up the system in a way that it becomes stable with regard to these problems by setting up buffers. It's the first step. Otherwise, you're dealing with a changing system that's constantly rubbing and constantly changing the level of stress and of irritation. First step, put in a buffer. Be it a person, be it a ritual. You know, I do a lot of Scrum work, so that's one thing I can relate to best. A lot of the meetings we have, the meetings themselves serve as buffers in terms of rituals, as ceremony. Jeff Sutherland called them ceremonies on his slide yesterday. The way we run these meetings is also a type of ritual which expresses your culture. It's a reflection of that culture. So if you're going to have to deal with a situation, stabilize it first. Standard medical practice, right? Do a triage first, if at all possible. If it's past that point, I don't think even this is going to help you. Then you're going to have to do some real serious crisis intervention. But presuming you're going to be running, you're going to be getting up to speed, and you're going to be knocking around people and teams around you, you'll either start resonating you, or you'll start hitting the wall, and you'll start getting this friction. So the first thing to do is stabilize that. Okay. Secondly, the way to deal with that afterwards is the way I work is by using a method developed by a close friend and colleague of mine, a psychologist named Ben Fuchs, which he calls post-conventional conflict work. He views conflict not only as this, like this, but says that there are 3 levels of conflict happening. And understanding the way, the techniques of dealing with them also makes a difference. Okay? Let me write those up here so that you have a collection of slides. Pre-conventional conflict is a challenge to survival. Pre-conventional conflict is when somebody's pointing a gun at your head, saying, give me your money or you're dead. Now, if you have to deal with this, the standard way, technique of dealing with this is by use of authority. It's interesting. Police departments are trained in pre-conventional techniques of authority, which is why you can't rationally discuss with a policeman when he's just given you a parking ticket, right? Ever think about that? They're not trained. You're not speaking the same language. This is a perfect example of it. You're trying to deal with him in a conventional way. You're trying to deal with him in a conventional way, and he's dealing with you in this way. Conventional conflict is a challenge to our identity, to our ego, right? And so the techniques we use as polite adults, mediation, facilitation. Okay, if we can all sit down at the table and talk about and express our feelings and stuff and amplify them, bring them out, we'll have a way, a social constructivist way of engaging in discourse and resolving our differences and becoming better people. Right. You're standing there in a street corner in New York, this guy's got his gun to your head, and you say, well, why don't you just express all your feelings and emotions? Do you think this is going to work? Think about it. This is a level of conflict work that we deal with. So anything that's a challenge is also an opportunity. Right? Pre-conventional is an opportunity to survive. It's a challenge to your survival, but on the other side. Because in post-conventional conflict work, the challenge or the opportunity we have is for understanding, for mutual and shared understanding. And the techniques we use here are also then different. Mediation, facilitation will only get you so far. That will get you to the status quo because you're still viewing conflict as something inherently problematic or bad. We're saying that conflict gives you an opportunity. Yes, you have to engage in understanding. The technique we use for that is something that's known as sense-making. Sense-making is a set of techniques to understand your thought processes, to understand your cognitive biases, and to engage at a meta level of discourse about these things. Why do we see these things differently? What value systems do we have? What belief systems do we have? Okay. This is a different level of work. Just give you a very simple sample of that. A sample from, this is from a book called Difficult Conversations from the Harvard Negotiation Project, and it's called the OIC conversation. If you're dealing with somebody and with whom you have conflict, who's attacking you, what you understand is, oh, I see. Observation. Interpretation. Conclusion. If someone's attacking you for something, what they're doing is presenting a conclusion. One of the best and quickest techniques you can learn to deal with that is to roll back and say, what you're presenting is a conclusion. This conclusion is based on a set of observations you've made, which have been filtered through your value systems and your belief systems. That what you've observed has been interpreted, and according to your values and beliefs, has been said that this is something you don't like. You have an emotional allergy here someplace. Because of that, you present a result, you present a conclusion, a criticism to me. So one of the standard answers is to go back and confront them first at the level of observation. Well, what data are you basing this on? What's your empirical data that's led you to this conclusion? Well, it's a standard thing that you can use that in many types of conflict. Oh, the pair programming is a bunch of crap. It's a standard one. Oh, that's interesting. What experience is this based on? Engaging them at that level is a less confrontational technique than putting value judgments on another person's value and belief systems. So you can start, and if you can start engaging at this level, you're engaging in a meta-level discourse that will eventually allow you to understand, oh, we have different views on this, and it may be okay to disagree. But what it does, it very quickly diffuses a conflict. Okay, this is just one example from a big toolkit of tools that we use to do conflict. But one of the most important things is, if at all possible, especially in bigger conflicts. Now, we've shifted right now from an example of organizational level conflict to an interpersonal level conflict. The bigger the conflict, more important it is to stabilize and put in buffers, and then start engaging at a different level. Any questions about that? I've just been talking for 3/4 of an hour now. Yeah.
Can you give us an example of putting a buffer in place and then engaging in this conversation? Something that might happen in our workplace?
Yeah. Typical for buffers are people. So a standard technique is to bring in some type of facilitator. I prefer to call it an interpreter. Some person whose job is interpreter is different than facilitator. Interpreter implies we are speaking different languages, and we need somebody to transform between those different languages. Interpreter also gets away from the idea of a facilitator as being someone applying conventional facilitation techniques, because that's not what it's about. And unfortunately, these people tend to be brought in many times only when it's too late. I highly recommend bringing in psychologists or social workers. That's why I work together with a number of them, because part of, I think, being professional is knowing where the boundaries of your expertise is and knowing when it's really good to bring in somebody who's trained in that. And realizing that mediation and facilitation is a conventional level technique. It has certain prerequisites. These prerequisites may or may not be there. Okay? So, if all you have is a screwdriver and you start thinking of all your problems as screws, you might not even have the right type of screwdriver for it, right? So you might not even be playing the same game, let alone not speaking the same language. Okay, going further in that topic will take us along the line of psychological and personality disorders, which tend to be more common than we think. But the idea would be to bring in somebody who will help you engage at another level of discourse about, what are these problems and where do they come from? Because a lot of this happens based on, I knew I was going to be able to bring this one in. Fear. Fear is the mind killer. Fear. Actually, I prefer the German term, Angst. It says it so nicely. Interesting on fear is that it's irrational. Okay, so if you go through a process, and this is one of the processes you might consider doing, of rationalizing it, what do you get? Risk. Risk is rationalized fear. So, what we try to do, especially in Scrum, the way I do it, is take that even further. Let's not only rationalize this, let's go another step and quantify it. And when you quantify this, what you're left with is information, value neutral. And information is something that then you can look at and say, okay, what are the costs? What are the benefits? And look at it in a non-emotional, value neutral way. But your triage, part of that process, is getting away from here. Because here, since this is irrational, people will be acting inherently irrational and even more unpredictable than they are otherwise. Okay?
We started a little late, but I have a question for you. Can you tell us where we can find resources for starting to defuse these things and work with buffers, things that can help us get concrete in specific team instances? You mentioned Difficult Conversations, the book.
Yeah. I'm hesitant to give you the site because it would sound like self-promotion, but
Go ahead.
catteams.com. Cat should be spelled C-A-T, big. It's complexadaptiveteams.com. It's a site that Ben Fuchs and I do to collect information, and there's a long bibliography and reading list on there.
Excellent.
Covering all aspects of almost all references that I used for the things I spoke today. One thing I just want to say at the end is, why does Agile fail? In my experience of doing this for such a long time, I've seen 4 reasons for Agile projects failing. First one I mentioned to you is that not understanding what inspect and adapt really means. Not understanding that it really means apply, inspect, and adapt. Go out of your comfort zone, do it, get the empirical data, get the experience, and then inspect that. Don't inspect someone's book. If you're doing Agile by the book, you're not doing Agile. Second, techniques like Scrum that go into talking about fear and risk, bringing this stuff in the open, quantifying it, are very powerful. They're very scary. Many people cannot deal with what comes up, and they will tend to be crushed by people who have political or psychological power. That's the other thing. People can't deal with Jack Nicholson and A Few Good Men. You can't stand the truth. Okay. Third place where it fails is where techniques are used that overstep a valid ontological boundary. Going back to this slide of ordered and unordered techniques and where waterfall is good, and this concept of ontological myopia. Even something like Agile, like Scrum or XP, is a tool. Used in the right place, it can be the most powerful tool available. Used wrongly, it can be the worst thing you do for your company. I think anybody who's done it, I see a number of people smiling and agreeing back there. And the fourth one is that projects fail because of problems in communication and conflict. Okay? And if there's one thing, one of these 4 problems that we can actually really work on proactively to get them out of the way, it's that one. Thanks for listening.